Welcome back, everyone, and thank you to our break sponsor, Kellogg's Away from Home. Hopefully, you had a chance to make the Morningstar Farms chorizo crumbles crispy rolls from the recipe inspiration we shared on Monday. I also hope that you found the breakout sessions valuable and that you enjoyed our various networking activities. Before we start our next session, we have another poll for you, so don't forget to check that one out. To introduce our next session, I am pleased to welcome Siobhan Hansen, who is stepping in for Allison Aubrey. Siobhan is the Food Choice Architecture and Nutrition Manager for Google on the Google Food team. Siobhan is actively involved with Google's Food's external partnerships, including Google's Food Lab and the World Business Council for Sustainable Development's FRESH program, and Menus of Change, for which she is the Vice Chair of the Business Leadership Council. Siobhan, thank you again for your flexibility and willingness to jump in here. I'll let you take it away.
Thanks so much, Sarah. It's a pleasure to be here. I'd like to welcome today's session, Climate Action, How to Engage Our Customers Around Climate Action and Change Communication. As chefs and food service leaders increasingly want to engage their customers in menu choices that support greater health and sustainability, the connection between restaurant practices and messaging, customer ordering, and climate change stands out as a critical and often thorny challenge. How should we communicate about this scientifically complex, often overwhelming topic in a hospitality environment when most people, especially now, just want to relax, have fun, and enjoy a great meal? How can we best engage our customers about the role of food choices in reducing global warming, especially for Millennials and Gen Z? We're going to talk about that. And we'll also consider how the climate change imperative touches and can help frame a broader, high-impact narrative that embraces many of the other issues that are often siloed around food, health, and sustainability. To get us started today, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Matt Goldberg, PhD and Associate Research Scientist for the Yale Program on Climate Change Communication. Matt's research focuses on persuasion, social influence, ideology, and strategic communication. He applies insights from his research to build public understanding and motivation to address climate change and other urgent environmental, social, and political issues. Matt will bring great insights from the Yale and George Mason University Climate Change in the American Mind Project. Matt, welcome. We are so glad to have you today. Over to you.
Thanks so much. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us for this fantastic summit. I'm here today to present to you the current state of knowledge of U.S. public opinion on climate change, how it varies and relates to the American diet and people's willingness to make dietary changes, and recent experiments that help us better understand how to encourage people to eat less meat and instead consume more plant-based meals. First, I need to thank our amazing collaborators and funders. This work would not be possible without them. Our research team has been tracking U.S. public opinion on climate change with biannual surveys since 2008 to better understand people's beliefs and attitudes about climate change, their risk perceptions, policy preferences, and much more. In our latest survey this past April, we found that 73% of Americans think global warming is happening. It matches an all-time high since our surveys began, but not nearly as high as we'd like it to be. Unfortunately, far fewer Americans understand that climate change is caused by human activities, only 62%. This is a problem because it's difficult to grasp an understanding of the solutions to the problem without understanding the causes. And even fewer Americans think they or their family will be harmed by climate change. They're far more willing to grant that to other people and future generations that they will be harmed. These top-line numbers mask the high level of variability across partisan and ideological lines. When looking at the proportion of Americans that think climate change is happening, for example, we see numbers as high as 98% among liberal Democrats and numbers as low as 47% among conservative Republicans. And we see this divide across a wide range of belief and attitudes measures, including the even larger divide in the understanding that climate change is human-caused. There's also significant geographic variation in public opinion across the U.S. Take San Francisco County as an example, where 83% of people think climate change is happening, and compare it to Cullman County, where only 46% of people think climate change is happening. Although some of these differences are due to partisanship and ideology, these differences also intersect with age, race, ethnic, income, and education differences and point to the importance of local context. Also, these interactive maps are available on our website, so you can see what people believe in your local area. I strongly encourage you to check it out. All of this sets the stage for thinking about how people understand the relationship between climate change and their food choices. Our team at Yale teamed up with the Earth Day Network to do a deep dive into this topic for a special report, Climate Change in the American Diet. When looking at people's eating habits, it's great to see most Americans, 53%, say they eat vegetables every day, though it's understandable to want that number to be even higher. However, I want to draw your attention to the very high level of consumption of beef. As many of you already know, 8% say they eat beef every day or multiple times per day. 33% say they eat beef 2 to 5 times per week, and 30% say once per week. That makes 71% of Americans that eat beef at least once per week. Knowing how carbon-intensive beef is, this is alarmingly high. Looking at people's awareness of food's connection to global warming, many people show some level of awareness of the connection, and it's good to see beef is understood to have the strongest connection to global warming. However, this also suggests that many Americans underestimate just how big of an impact food has on our climate. This is consistent with other research looking at exactly this. People underestimate the emissions associated with a wide range of products, but significantly more for food. However, it's also encouraging to know that labeling has been shown to be very effective at reducing high emissions food choices. Further, it's also really encouraging that our team's analyses show that most Americans are willing to make dietary changes. For example, 55% of Americans are at least somewhat willing to eat more plant-based meat alternatives, and 54% are more willing to eat less red meat in general. However, this willingness is a little bit weaker when it comes to dairy alternatives or eating less dairy in general. As leaders and practitioners in the food industry, you might be thinking, yeah, Matt, it's great that many people are willing to change, but what do I do? One key piece of advice is to stop labeling meatless meals as vegetarian. In a recent large-scale study, researchers manipulated how meatless dishes were framed as vegetarian, being good for the environment, facilitating social connection, or neutral, in which meatless dishes were mixed into the menu with other dishes. Findings showed strong support for the idea that labeling dishes as vegetarian reduces how often people order them. Although there are some small differences between the other types of labeling, the non-vegetarian frames performed similarly overall. It makes sense that the vegetarian frame performed worse than the others, and this is likely because the label vegetarian has become an identity. So when people see it and don't identify with it, the dish is less likely to draw their interest. This makes sense considering the fact that only 3% of Americans identify as vegetarian and 1% as vegan. Of course, how you approach getting people to eat more plant-based meals depends on your goals and how your business and relationships with the customer are set up. Recent research has identified different clusters of people based on their eating habits and different barriers to eating less meat. For example, people might reduce their meat consumption because of health or ethical concerns, because there's social support for doing so, because of one's environmental identity, or simply because they're more willing to try new foods. These factors help us understand the different reasons people have for their food choices. Additional research shows that tailoring messages to these different clusters of people is especially effective compared to messages that do not match the message to the specific barriers of a given cluster of people. Together, these findings show that although there's a lot of work to do in shifting the American diet and reducing its contribution to climate change, there's also a lot of promise. Most Americans say they're willing to make dietary changes and they're responsive to interventions that aim to decrease their meat consumption. It's events like these that help leaders like you all pave the way to help make it happen. Thank you so much for your time, and please visit our website for more information. Follow me and our research center on Twitter for new research findings and latest updates, or email me if you have any questions. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you.
Matt, thank you so much for that great context. You've given us a lot to think about regarding the willingness to change for consumers, about food choices, and what kind of messaging we need to start to consider as we try to encourage people toward more plant-based diets and the thought around climate change. So thank you for that. Just a reminder to the audience that you can send us questions through the chat. I'm going to bring up next our next speaker, Amy Cull. Amy has spent her entire career in food communications, working for global agencies like Ketchum and Edelman. She recently started her own agency, Marin Restorative Communications, to focus solely on working with clients dedicated to food systems improvement. She's also the director of communications for the Food for Climate League, a brand new nonprofit focused on identifying the optimal communications tactics and avenues for engagement to catalyze a global movement toward climate beneficial eating. I do want to mention that we're very sorry that Tarotpaul had a family matter and couldn't join us today. But Amy, I know you're going to do a brilliant job talking about Food for Climate League. And this is an amazing new organization that I can't wait for you to share more about. Over to you.
Thank you, Siobhan. I'm thrilled because we've been lucky enough to be working with you and Google. And I am very sad about Eve not being here, so I'll do my very best to represent her properly. We'll go to the next slide. So the reason The Food for Climate League, well, first of all, I want to thank the CIA for inviting us to speak today, because it's so important to reach this audience of all of you creative geniuses in food service, because we know that food trends happen in food service, and everyone's looking to you to come up with the most delicious and great solutions. Peggy Polis Castro, who was in a breakout session just now, and Matthew, so much of your research dovetails exactly with what we've done for the Food for Climate League. I want to talk about Eve because she's an extraordinary individual, and her background is extremely relevant for the conversation today. And also it explains why she's the founder and executive director of the recently formed Food for Climate League. Next slide. So Eve has spent the last 10 years researching the food culture, the intersection of food culture, well-being, and the digital age, because the behaviors that are resulting globally from this intersection absolutely is affecting climate change and human beings' search for connection and meaning in life. She's written 2 books and done a terrific study, and you can find all the information at Tarotpaul.com. And I highly recommend that, first of all, everybody get a copy of her recent book, Hungry. It was just published, came out in late June. And it includes all kinds of information about Eve is truly one of the top global experts on millennials and Gen Zs and their behaviors about food, and finding connections and meaning in life. So I've read it. I think it's terrific. She's also done a Hungry study with Data Central, and that not only has very up-to-the-minute information about the digital age and climate communications, but also how COVID has been affecting people's behavior regarding food. So it's about as up to the minute as you can possibly get. And it's a terrific study. So you can find all of that at her website. This was some photos that she wanted to share with you about how the reason she really looks at millennials and Gen Zs and their interest in food is that we know that these cultures, that these generations are the most absolutely food obsessed culture, generations that have ever lived on this planet. I mean, they would rather eat food than buy cars and buy houses. They will spend a lot of their discretionary money on food experiences. These photos she took were in very, very rural areas of Asia. So it's not just in the big cities, it's not just in America that this phenomenon is happening. And so she truly does bring a global perspective. Next. Here's an example that for Google Trends on how this digital age is impacting human well-being, and it tells kind of a bleak story. It compares numbers from searches in 2007 to 2020, and really kind of gives you a temperature pulse on people's anxiety and their levels of increasing levels of loneliness and anxiety and their search for meaning in life and what is their purpose in life. And so much of this is spurred on by the digital age and people communicating electronically and missing out on these all important human interactions face to face. And we know that COVID is only making things worse in this area. Next. So emotions is incredibly important, and what we'll be talking about in the Food for Climate League is how emotions drive these food trends, these increased anxiety levels, loneliness, depression, and the search for meaning really lead into food trends. So people's feelings for anxiety are causing them to ask for more and more transparency in the food supply. How's my food made? Where does it come from? Who's working on the farms? And the digital age makes it all possible. People are also want to optimize what they're eating, and they can often give themselves very restricted diets just to have some kind of sense of control to calm down their anxiety. this loneliness that so many of us are feeling for the first time deeply because of COVID, it causes people to go on social media and try to get validation with likes. They follow influencers. They might join a diet tribe and say, I'm paleo, I'm vegan, I'm low carb. And to be sharing these experiences digitally to try to make these all important human connections that we also desperately need. And the search for meaning, the people wanting to have meaning in their life, is leading to fueling do-it-yourself movements, sustainable food, and a very big, desperate need to get back to nature. Next. The great news here, and I hope people will take this talk as some really great news, is that sustainable eating can meet all of these needs. And we have a new approach with the Food for Climate League, is that if we can approach sustainable eating by meeting the direct human needs for control, community, and purpose, we are going to have a really great shot at trying to save the planet for humanity and other living beings. The control, people can control through nutrient-rich diets that include healthier soil, through transparency, through biodiversity. We can actually control some of the outcomes. With the community, by working with local, more regional food production and heritage foods that are not co-opted by the majority culture, but really harken back to people's ethnic roots and even the terroir of particular areas and the foods that are produced there. And then purpose, meeting the needs for purpose, people getting involved. And going back to what Matthew was saying, and even what Peggy was saying, we don't even necessarily have to talk, and might be a good idea not to say that this particular food is good for the climate or good for the planet, because there's so many other great things that we can promote about these climate beneficial foods. Next. So Eve and I, our interests very much dovetail, and we were lucky enough to meet through Google and the wonderful food at Google. Of course, this would happen right during the presentation. Oh man. Let's see. Oh my. There we are. I'm sorry. Working from home during COVID. Anyway, my background, I have the pleasure to work for 30 years at 3 of the most respected and global food PR agencies in the world, Ketchum, Edelman, and Fleischmann Hillard. And I've worked with major brands and commodity boards. I know a thing or two about food communications. And I also was able to be on the National Academy of Sciences Roundtable on Obesity Solutions that talked a lot about the intersection between human health and obesity and malnutrition and climate change and the degradation of our ecosystems. I have now started, because it's a passion of mine, an independent agency called Marin Restorative Communications, because I want to spend the rest of my career really trying to help improve the food systems, and particularly at the juncture of human and planetary health. And I can do it. I'm right here in Marin, 2 miles from Paul Hawkins' house in Mill Valley, where Project Drawdown is based, and of course just north of San Francisco, and this beautiful culinary mecca. Next. I am going to bring my experience to the Food for Climate League and other clients based on, I know very much how to have brands make emotional connections with their consumers, particularly in the context of serious issues. I was lucky enough, while general manager of Edelman's Edible specialty agency, to work with Nestle and the wonderful people at Gerber on the Lucas campaign that won the 2018 PR Week campaign of the year. For every category. Everybody loved Lucas. He was the first special needs child to be chosen by Gerber to be their spokesbaby of the year. And Lucas and his wonderful family, we wanted to make sure, both the brand and the agency, how much we protected them and did not in any way exploit them, but to raise awareness for diversity and inclusion, and that every baby is a Gerber baby. And people just went wild over this adorable little boy. And it helped not only contemporize the Gerber brand and increase sales, which we know is important to all of us in business, but also it just had an outpouring of wonderful feelings about for moms and parents and families who have special needs children, feeling part of the mainstream, and just being a great thing that employees felt good about and everybody involved felt good about. And it was only done through earned media. We did not put any advertising dollars or paid media behind it. And that was very important. So the channels that you pick, the tactics that you pick are highly important when working on serious issues. Another client for Marine Restorative right now is Barnana. Next slide, please. And their big mission is upcycling food and reducing food waste. So I put this in because this is an extremely cost-effective tactic that any of you disruptor brands or smaller scale, money is tight for everybody right now. And this is just something that the social media team did. And we launched it last month. Actually, this month we launched it. And it's a program called Food Waste Heroes. And that food waste is bananas. And it's working because it's in the brand's voice. It's fun and playful and energetic. And it's also true to their mission. So you want to make sure that programs are very true to what is authentic to your brand. And Barnana has upcycled 100 million bananas from becoming climate harming food waste since their inception. So we wanted to honor other exceptional people in this area around the country and tell our highly, highly engaged brand fans, if you have a brand that you have a wild following, this is a neat idea to borrow the equity of someone who's doing something similar. So we reached out. These were the founders of Rethink Food New York City, and honored them among our channels and sent them a bunch of brand snacks and thanked them for the great work and told people how they could go and donate to Rethink Food. And also they were so excited, they tweeted about Barnana on their channel. So this was only done in-house by the in-house team. Extremely cost-effective idea you might want to think about. Next. So I'm going to, in the interest of time, go quickly through this, but there's just, you can be a very brilliant communicator on a very tight budget. Just make sure you stay authentic to your organizational values, stay true to your brand voice. Have fun if you're a fun brand, be fun with it, be contemporary, be sexy. You don't always have to be so serious, and be nimble when things happen. Turn off your channels, your social media channels, for goodness sake, if there are some major, major things happening in the news and in society. You do never want to be insensitive to incredibly important matters. Next. So on to the Food for Climate League. This is I'm very proud to be representing this extraordinary group of people today. The Food for Climate League is a brand new 501c3 that was formed with a generous funding from Google, from Michael Bacher, Siobhan Hansen, Eva Anzac, and the Food at Google team. We could never have done this without them. They helped invest in the research I'm going to share with you last year, and both psychologically and cheering us on, and financially. So thank you. So the Food for Climate League, we're hearing in the menus of change all of these wonderful things that people are doing in silos. Yale's doing great things over here. Rutgers is doing great things over here. Different, you're coming up with wonderful menu ideas and regenerative agriculture, but what we've found is that nobody is speaking together at a meta level and really helping consumers come along in ways that we think could make a big, huge difference for the climate and biodiversity and all of those good things, and to meet those human needs. So we started with the Food for Climate League. Climate change is a wicked problem. If you've heard about wicked problems, they're complex, very polarizing, knotted up like this picture here. There's no right or wrong answer, and sometimes you fix things in one area and something goes south in another area. So we are all involved in this wicked problem of climate change. Next. Of course, the confounders in food service, you all know, COVID-19, worker health situations, the economic devastation of the industry. Social justice on top of everything is intricately involved with climate change. Obesity and malnutrition, and food safety. Food safety is incredibly important, as we all know. So here's our team and partners. We like to see ourselves as warriors in trying to improve the climate and the food system. And our partners, again, are Food at Google, the Future Food Institute based in Bologna, Italy, and just wonderful Sarah Reversi. And we are working as a research collaborative partner with the Menus of Change University Research Collaborative. These are the core people who started this. So last year, we conducted research. We did a landscape analysis on these 6 major areas and we wanted to try to find commonalities and differences in language, messaging, semiotics, visuals, and representations from major global legacy brands, disruptor brands, both in the retail sector, channel, and food service. Next. And see what consumers are looking at. We also conducted in-depth hour-long interviews with these folks. They are climate psychologists, behavior experts, climate communications experts, and climate and food communicators, people who are both in academia and practitioners on the left, on the right, and we tried to get a nice diversity in the voices that we were talking about. What they've seen that works in climate and food communications, what are some of the drawbacks, how could we make sure that we don't try to reinvent the wheel, because a lot of work has been done in this area. How might we approach this? If we were starting with a clean state, how might we approach it? And we got tremendous feedback. Next. One thing we found is that there's some mistaken assumptions. First of all, that people think that education is enough, that all we have to do is share facts and figures and information and tell consumers about this situation. This is how we can solve climate change, and they'll go off and behave the way we hope they will. And that's just not going to work. The second one is that you have to talk about climate in order to get people to eat climate beneficially. And that just even the same thing with nutrition that we've learned, that is not necessarily true. And that finally, that sustainable goods and practices can only resonate with a very small population, and that also is not true. Next.
So Amy,
yes.
We've got to pull this together. We've got a few questions for you and Matt. So I'm going to bring Matt back up to the screen. Thank you so much for those contributions around Food for Climate League. You had so much to pull together in just a few short minutes to cover Eve's work as well as Food for Climate League and all of those exceptional examples of communications that you have yourself been part of. So thank you so much for the sharing. Matt, thank you for joining us back again. And we've got some great questions coming in through the chat. I wanted to ask you just a little bit about the social norms in food choices. Can you give us a little more detail there? And rapidly, because we've got just a few minutes now before we need to wrap up the session.
Yeah, social norms are crucial for information transfer in that we don't weigh the pros and cons of every single individual choice. We just look around. But also the shifting social pressures, people anticipate that the tides are changing, and then they will change their own behaviors accordingly.
Thank you. I want to ask you both a question because I think it would be very practical for the audience, and that is, what are the resources, the practical points of connection that people can make just to get their hands on how they can attack and address the communications for their own scenario, whether they be in a restaurant environment, in a workplace setting? Can you give us just a couple of good ideas from each of you? And Amy, I'll start with you.
Okay, please go to the Food for Climate League website, and you can get an executive summary of our research findings that are much more than I just explained, and that's for free. And we also can help you with individual projects as well. The full report is available at a price, but we also can give you consulting services.
And Matt, on your end.
Yeah, to find a steady stream of our work, you can go to climatecommunication.yale.edu. And you could also follow the program on Twitter or follow me on Twitter at MattGoldberg100. I'll be posting research summaries, advice on some of these issues, and tweeting about climate and where climate communication takes place in the larger field of social influence and social psychology.
Thank you. That's great. Let me just ask you too, as we start to wrap up and close, one last thought that you want to share with the audience, something that you might not have been able to get in, just one little teaser that the audience can walk away with from your session. Matt?
I think the biggest one is that context matters. So none of this advice that we're giving will apply in all situations and to all people. So I think take from this what best applies to your local context, knowing the people, who's conveying the message, and what the message is itself.
Great advice. Thank you. Amy.
I'd just say the Food for Climate League, if you look at our website, we really do have a different and new approach. And it's time to break down the silos. COVID's given us an opportunity to start anew and take out a blank slate and really try to improve the food system. And there's ways that we could do it, but we've got to break down the silos. And we are here to be that clearinghouse and try to help say one common concerted message. But we have to do it together. No one individual can do it alone.
Thank you so much, both of you. Great advice, great context setting, really good examples, and some references and recommendations about where people can go to address these topics and issues. It's been a great discussion, and one that I know that we're all grappling with. You referenced, Amy, many times the COVID situation. So people are sitting with a lot of these tough challenges, and you all have helped us today. The dialogue has been an important stimulus to help each of us think about the role we can individually play in engaging customers around climate change, food choices, meal experiences, and messaging. So with that, happiness and great health to everybody watching. Thank you so much for joining us today. And back over to you, Sarah.
Thank you so much, Siobhan, Matt, and Amy. We are now going into our final event of the day, our networking reception. As during the break, we have a range of ways for you to engage with everyone who is attending today, from your peers and suppliers to the presenters, through our one-on-one networking and sponsor expo. Don't forget that you are entered in a raffle for each activity that you engage in. And if you intend and participate all 6 weeks, you'll have a chance to win a free registration and travel to next year's conference, where hopefully we'll be able to meet together. And last, we want to make sure that you get a chance to offer your opinion on this virtual series. So please fill out our feedback survey, which you can access at this link here or in the link you'll get via email. Enjoy the reception, and thank you so very much again for joining us today. We hope you'll join us again next Wednesday when we look at the impact that the pandemic has had on our food supply system, and we dive deeper into strategies to rebuild our operations and workforce. You'll find the full schedule at menusofchange.org. Same time, same place next week. And until then, stay safe and be well. Goodbye for now.